death, taxes, bye weeks. These are three things you can always count on, and they all hurt. Welcome to week 5 of the NFL season, which means the byes have come. And in 3 weeks, we will get the first of our 2 byemageddons when 6 teams, almost 20% of the league, are on holiday. But unlike injuries, we know that these outages and player unavailabilities are coming, and that means we can prepare. We can either think ahead or we fall behind. Next on Dynasty Compass. Hey, I'm Jeff Blaylock, the other Jeff B from Football Guys, and welcome to Dynasty Compass. I want to start, first of all, by thanking you for watching or listening this week. This podcast cannot exist without you watching and listening and hopefully learning something new each week, whether that be a new way of thinking about roster management or a new framework to help you break down your dynasty decisions, or maybe just a new idea that sparks your thought process. That's what I hope to be, a guide for you, a compass, and not a GPS. This week, the byes have begun in the NFL, which means that we now have players who will be out for non-injury and non-suspension reasons. But I will say up front that I believe that byes are the best kind of unavailability that we can have in the NFL. We know they're coming. We know when the player is going to be available. You can pencil bye-week players right back into their usual lineup spots the following week. This is a level of certainty for unavailability that only suspensions can provide, and although those typically last much longer, the effect is still the same. There's no questionable tag on our players. There's no will he or won't he kind of game that we have to play each week. There's no need for a plan B in case our starter won't play because we already know that he's not playing. There's no wondering if our starter is going to have a full workload this week or if they're going to be on some kind of a pitch count. There's no wondering if the coach might hold them out because of trade rumors or something external to the game itself. Nope, they're just out. We just know that they're out, period. That's it. That's all we need to know. And we also have, in addition to being certain that they're out, we're certain to know when, because we've known about these byes since the NFL released its schedule back in May. So when you look at it in this light, byes really aren't so bad. They're certainly not up to the level of death and taxes, although they are just as certain. But when you compare it with injuries and other issues that can keep players out of lineups, I will take my players being on bye any week that I can, because we can plan for these far in advance. And that's exactly what savvy managers do. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In a previous episode, I outlined the 5 kinds of players who are on your roster. And I introduced what I call the Startability Ladder to help you guide your decisions on who to insert into the open spaces of your lineup in any given week. So I'm going to do a real quick refresher on those so you don't have to go back and listen to that episode. But of course, you're welcome to. The link will be down below on YouTube and in the notes for other platforms. The 5 kinds of players, really quickly, you have cornerstones, set and forgets, next man up, developing talent, and dart throws. The cornerstones are the players you are building around strategically. If you were to create marketing materials about your team, these would be the faces on those materials. These are the faces of your franchise. Set and forget are players who are locked into your starting lineup every single week. They are penciled in and you forget about them. If they are playing, they start. Next man up are the players who are not locked into your lineup on a weekly basis, but they get inserted when there's not enough of the first 2 or when someone is hurt or on a bye. Your developing talent is unique to dynasty formats. These are younger players who aren't seeing much playing time now and much usage even when they do play, but they have the potential to be valuable players in the future. And then we have dart throws. These are players with no path to productive roles right now. They're role players. They're people without regular fantasy relevant starting roles today, but there is a potential that they could come in under the right circumstances. They could be a starter in the NFL, which means they could be a starter for you even if that's not on a week in, week out basis. So every player on your roster is one of those 5, and we have arrayed them from most valuable to least. Now, there's one other category that we have that I didn't include and don't think of as a category your players could be in, and that's people who are on season-long injured reserve. These are players who are out for the season. If we were in redraft, we would just simply drop them, but this is Dynasty, so we can keep them for another year. So this is not a category in and of itself, but players who are on season-long injured reserve are not in your discussion or decision process for filling out your lineups because they are unavailable for the rest of the season. So in that episode, and when we think about our starting lineups, the key question is, what would it take for me to insert this player into my starting lineup? What would it take for me to insert this player into my starting lineup? And from that, I created the Startability Ladder, which I am going to run through really fast, but it is relevant to what we're going to talk about. Highest level of all, they're active. If they're active, they're playing, period. The second level is we have an open flex spot on my roster, and this is my preferred option of all of the players that I have. One step below that is a limitation of it. There is an open positional spot, and he's my best option at that position. So if I have a need for running back, this is my best available running back. The fourth level down is that my preferred option from either 2 or 3 is not available, so this is my next best option. Number 5 is I am chasing ceiling, and this dart throw has the highest upside of anybody that I have on my roster. At number 6, there's just simply no one better available on the waiver wire. I looked, and the guys I have are what I'm going to have to go with. Kind of lowest and most desperate level is I'm going to get a 0 if I don't start him. That's going to become a critical discussion point here in a moment. And then even below that is the I'm not trying to win this week, so it doesn't matter that this guy is in my lineup. I'm happy to put him in there. Now, how far you have to go down this ladder is a function of how many people are out, whether it's injuries or buys or suspension or anything else. What positions do they play, and how deep is your startable roster? How many people on your roster can you logically slot into your lineup and be satisfied with that? But this framework isn't just about this week's lineup. We can apply it into future lineups. And when we do that, we're going to be able to find what I call bye-week crunches. These are any situation where a player or multiple players being on a bye are going to create positional or lineup scarcity issues that could ultimately result in you not being able to fill out a complete, valid starting lineup. Bye weeks compound the unavailability of injured players. And even though we can predict and project bye weeks from before the season starts, they nonetheless add to the group of people who are not available for you to put into your roster. The more of those kinds of players that are unavailable, or the shorter your bench is, the smaller your roster size is, the more kinds of bye-week crunches you're going to experience. Now, in my mind, there are 4 types of bye-week crunches, and I'm going to list them in the order of severity in my own mind. The first one, I'm just simply going to call critical. A critical bye-week crunch means that I cannot submit a valid starting lineup. I simply do not have enough or the right people to submit a lineup that matches the league's criteria. The second most serious is what I would call no depth. A no depth bye-week crunch means that I have no backups in case there is an injury. So I do not have the flexibility to start someone. If someone I am counting on has got a questionable designation coming into the week, there is nobody else on my bench who I can sub in for that person if they end up not playing. One injury risk means I have one additional option for a starting lineup spot. So if my guy who I have in the lineup is questionable and doesn't play, I do have someone I can slot in and at least have a valid starting lineup, even if that is not in any way the option I would like to have in there. And then finally, we have the super flex swap. This means that I don't have enough quarterbacks who are starting this week to fill my super flex spot or spots. So I have another position player that's in there. That, of course, is perfectly fine and perfectly valid for lineup purposes. But because we know when these buys are going to occur, we can also predict when these crunches are going to occur, and we can plan accordingly for them. So here's how I go about identifying and dealing with thinking about my bye week crunches. I'm pretty old school. I like to write things down on pieces of paper in pen or pencil. So I will take my dynasty roster and fill out my ideal starting lineup. These would start with my cornerstones and my set and forget players. Even if they are injured, I'm going to go ahead and put them on this initial starting roster. This initial starting lineup, but I'm not going to include anyone who is on season-long IR. So for the teams that I have Malik Neighbors or Tyreek Hill on, both of them suffered really unfortunate season-ending injuries this weekend. I won't list those, even if they are part of my ideal starting lineup, because they are no longer available this season. Now that I have this ideal starting lineup list, I'm going to note which ones are currently injured. And that's going to be people who are out or are doubtful or are even questionable. I want to know who might not be available or who is not available before I start laying bye week absences on top of that. So now that I know who's out, I'm going to just go ahead and for the moment, I'm going to assume that if they're out now, they're going to stay out. If they're questionable now, they're going to stay questionable. Whatever their health status is, I'm going to draw through for the next several weeks, and we'll get to adjusting for that in a minute. Now what I want to do is go week by week through the NFL schedule starting from now and see what buys are going to do to my lineup. Where will it create some scarcity? And I'm usually going to look out about 3 weeks or so. So this is week 5. I will be looking out through at least week 7, but probably week 8, and I probably won't look any farther than that right now because that's a far enough runway, 3 weeks, for me to be able to do something if I see a crunch coming. And so now that we've marked through the buys, now let's go back and look to our injured players. When do we actually expect them to return? If they're questionable, my assumption is they will return week to week to week. I just need to know if they might not be available that week. If I have players who are out or are on NFL injured reserved, I have a sense of what week those guys might be coming back. If they are, that would alleviate the bye week crunch that I have. If they're not, the crunch is still very, very much there. Even if I think those players are going to come back and they are going to be in my lineup 2 or 3 weeks from now, it's always still good to have thought about what a plan B might be in case they go from out to questionable and we're not sure. Maybe they're game time decisions. Maybe they need another week. Maybe they are held out until their own bye week, which is something coaches will do sometimes. So we need a plan B in our heads, but we don't necessarily have to go through all the machinations of making it work yet. Critical crunches are going to need our attention. And we have the ability to acquire players via waivers, via free agency, via trade. We've talked about all of those options in previous episodes to this one. We have the option of waiting it out just to see if any of our injured players are going to come back in time. We can also just simply take a 0 by intentionally submitting an invalid lineup. Now, obviously, we only want to do that if our league's rules let us, and if we would not be viewed as tanking or being in violation of anti-tanking rules or standards that are in place. And I will say this, as someone who is a commissioner in a number of leagues, if I am going to intentionally take a 0 and submit a lineup that isn't valid, I will let my commissioner know that this is my intent. I will let my league mates know that too, and I'm going to tell them why I am doing that. And generally speaking, the reason is because I don't want to sacrifice some long-term value for a 1-week fix. I'm willing to just take my 0 and move on. When I'm heading in the southern direction in our compass metaphor, south is a total rebuild, makes perfect sense to not drop a developing talent or someone I might be able to use a season or 2 from now to just take care of a problem that is 1 week only right now. I'm also unwilling to sacrifice longer term value if I am a contender and I am safely in the playoffs. So that includes teams that are to the north, somewhat to the teams that are to the west, if they are safely ensconced in a playoff spot, and even some of my more wait and see, chip in a chair kind of teams to the east. Again, I don't want to do anything rash to just solve a problem for now. If I don't have to have this win, then I don't need to take drastic steps in order to get it. I am more willing to do that if I am in win now mode and I could really use this win today, or I need every point that I can score. When you are in win now mode, when you are in the West and our compass, you are willing to shove all your chips into the table right now and sacrifice whatever you have to in future seasons to win that trophy now. So if I'm in a win now situation, I am actually willing to part with something that could help me down the road for a 1 week fix, because this week is really important to me. But otherwise, I don't want to sacrifice a longer term value for a 1 week band-aid. I'm only going to do this if I really, really have to. The other three kinds of crunches, so all of that was in the conversation about critical ones that would result in an invalid lineup. Everything beyond that only results in an invalid lineup if a number of dominoes happen to fall. These include when we have no depth, we have one injury risk, and we have a super flex swap. They're not imminent threats right now, but they can quickly become one. They're more risk tolerance than they are a crisis. The shorter my bench is, the more likely I'm either going to have to tolerate risk or I'm going to have to pivot to something else. If I have a deeper bench, I can usually find a solution that will at least get a valid lineup submitted. Whether that's good enough or not is another matter, but I can at least fill out the lineup card. Now, there aren't a lot of dynasty leagues that require kickers or defense, including absolutely none of the ones that I am a commissioner in. But if you are in such a league, and I'm in a couple of them this year, you'll almost certainly face a critical crunch when either your kicker or your defense is on bye, and it's really critical if they're both on bye at the same time. I only like to have one of each of these things on my roster at any point in time. Maybe toward the very end of the season, I might pick up a second defense just so I can kind of stream between the two of them, but I'll never have more than one kicker. But you can look ahead anyway with buys and see when this is going to occur. See when your kicker is on bye. See when your defense is on bye. So if you've looked ahead, you can pick a replacement ahead of time. By doing it a couple of weeks in advance, you actually avoid the competition for that defense or that kicker from people who are streaming the position from a week-to-week basis. The solution is going to be cheaper if you pick it up in advance. There'll be less competition for it. That in turn makes it more likely that you're going to get that defense or that kicker on your roster, which means you don't have to plan as much for what happens if you do not do that. The closer in time you get to a crunch, the more likely that something's not going to go right in your effort to fill that hole. Someone else will outbid you, someone with a lower priority will take it, or someone will have looked ahead themselves, seen their defense is on bye as well, and taken the one that you want. So as far out as you can without sacrificing anything long-term, you want to try to solve a problem that will ultimately lead to a crunch. Back in the episode where we talked about waivers and free agent acquisition budgets, I presented what I call the FAAB Four. These are questions I always ask myself with any player acquisition, whether that be free agency, whether that be waivers, whether that be a trade. And here again, it comes up as I am looking toward dealing with these bye-week crunches and acquiring a player in order to solve the problem. The four questions I need to ask myself begin exactly with that problem. What problem am I trying to solve? And in the context of bye-week crunches, is this a 1 week problem I need to solve, or is there a deeper roster construction flaw that I'm trying to address? Then what kind of player is this that I'm acquiring? Usually, unless it's by a trade, if it's waivers or free agency, it's going to be at best the next man up or dart throw. It's rarely going to be developing talent, because that isn't necessarily what I need to fix a bye week problem. The third question, when do I expect the value of this player to benefit me, is often just this week only. In the case of deeper roster construction situations, it could be multiple weeks. But typically, when it comes to bye week management, we're really looking at whichever 1 week the bye occurs, whether it's this one or a week several in the future. Then the fourth question is, what am I giving up? Whether it is FAAB money, whether it is waiver priority, whether it is a roster spot, someone on it, am I having to cut a player? What is it that I'm having to give up in order to bring this player in to solve my bye week problem? And is that cost something that I want to spend in order to do this? Or does it make more sense to me strategically to just take my zero? The answers to these questions will guide you into how you're going to handle your bye week crunches, whether you're going to preemptively pick up a player several weeks in advance, whether you're going to take a wait and see approach, see if your injured players come back, if a player that's questionable is going to play, and then whether to just simply accept a zero if it comes to that. And by going through this process logically and by asking and answering these questions for yourself, you'll have a much better understanding of what it is you're trying to achieve long term and what it is you need to achieve this week or a couple of weeks from now in case you've got a bye week crunch that needs to be solved. So let me close out the main body of our show by saying something I've said once or twice before. Unless I am in win now mode and I really need a win this week, I'm not going to sacrifice longer term value. I'm not going to make a move that goes against my strategic direction for a 1 week fix. I'd rather take my zero and then move on to the next week and keep intact what I'm trying to do for the future, rather than just try to solve a problem that's going to go away in 1 week when whoever is on bye and causing this issue for me comes back into the active lineups. So this week, we've talked all about buys. Next week, we're going to talk about bye-byes. When it is okay to finally let go of a player who's been on your roster for a little while. It's a little bit different than the ad drop kind of things we've been talking about the last few weeks. This is kind of that point where you've lost enough faith in the player that it's just time to let them go. As always, thank you for listening or watching, for subscribing, for following, for liking, for reviewing, for reaching out to me, for spreading the word about me. This show cannot happen without all of that. So thank you. I'm Jeff Blaylock, and I will talk to you next week on Dynasty Compass.